What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and Games Workshop just recently released a bit of a stealth update to the datasheet for Dante. The story of the new Dante miniature, resplendent in its Primaris glory, is a bit of a funny one, given that it was originally leaked to a customer on the GW website before the model was even announced. Now that he's publicly available, the datasheet for Dante has been updated to represent his new Primaris status. And in it, we see a continuation of some of the issues with Primaris characters that we've seen in the game so far. So let's talk about the issue with the Primaris Space Marine characters that GW has been updating, and some of the ways that they could approach these datasheets a little bit differently. As always, if you enjoy my Warhammer 40k content, go ahead and hit like on the video, subscribe on the channel, all the YouTube things. You know what's up, and let's get into this. Now, I'm always excited for a new datasheet of a character. I think it's an interesting way to continue the story of the 41st millennium and create new interpretations of an existing personality as they develop throughout the narrative of the game. Now, I'm very much a graduate of the school of War Machine and Hordes, and I'm always excited for new versions of an already existing character, because in that game, different versions of a character coexisted with their updated counterparts. Each of these individual versions had wholly unique mechanics and special abilities that followed the theme of a character. If a character was a tactician, each version of them would have tactical abilities that represented their expertise, but each would be slightly different to represent them learning, changing, and being issued more war gear as they got older, more experienced, and the story of the game progressed. The old versions of the characters still remained playable, and because they had different abilities, they were each uniquely powerful in their own right. It was a really cool system that allowed you to get really invested in your characters and watched as they evolved. But unfortunately, that's not the case for Warhammer 40k, and we can see that pretty clearly on these Primaris character datasheets. Warhammer games have always loved to assign an arbitrary set of abilities to a character, and then white-knuckle hold on to those as the character gets updated throughout the years. Now, in contrast to War Machine and Hordes, it is unlikely that characters will have multiple versions that are available at the same time in a Warhammer game. There are some exceptions to this, one of them being Captain Tycho from the Blood Angels Space Marine chapter. Tycho has two profiles within the Blood Angels supplement, representing the character both before and after he fell to the Black Rage. Unfortunately for him, with the exception of the addition of the standard Black Rage abilities that all Death Company Space Marines in that chapter have, the two are identical, down to their very war gear and special abilities. There's not really any functional difference between Captain Tycho and his Death Company version, Tycho the Lost. Because obviously, having your personality subsumed by the psychic manifestation of your Primarch's untimely demise has never had an adverse or transformative effect on anyone. Clearly, that's not the case. So while you can pick which version of Tycho you want, basically you pick whether or not you want his Rites of War aura to affect Death Company units or regular units, and you pick the one that corresponds with that. Nothing else for him changes significantly. Now, I will give a little bit of a shout out to Chaplain Cassius here. He has profiles in both the Ultramarines and Death Watch supplements with distinct differences. Each of them has exactly half of the full Master of Sanctity plus Wise Orator combo that you would normally have on a Chaplain. So if you put them both together, he would make basically one normal Space Marine Chaplain. Now, that is nice to see, but it is the exception rather than the rule for updated characters in the game. And the same isn't exactly true for the updated Primaris characters that we're seeing releasing now, like Dante and Azrael before him. These new Primaris-sized characters boast almost identical datasheets to their original Firstborn incarnations. This certainly has some minor benefit of branding a character. If Dante, for example, always has the abilities that Dante has, every time you see a Dante on the table, almost regardless of the edition or current version of the game or season that you're playing in, you will always expect that they have similar abilities. A Dante will always play identically to another Dante. But the sad part of the matter is that that's really boring. And I think it does a pretty big disservice to the experience of Warhammer 40k as a whole, both from a mechanical gameplay perspective and a narrative storytelling perspective. Speaking mechanically, instead of trying to reevaluate and refresh the tired old mechanics of a character from a modern perspective with 1 to 2 years of hindsight, looking back at a character after the release of their original supplement, like we are with Dante and with Azrael, we get a functional reprint of the same profile that we had earlier. At that point, almost why even bother? You might as well just make us use the new model with the old datasheet. So instead of giving Dark Angels and Blood Angels players an interesting new character profile to work with and try to create combos with, now they just have to cut 10 points out of their list in order to fit the updated versions of these characters for having slight statistical increases. And the representation of a character that has grown with the experience of an additional century or so of combat between the Firstborn and Primaris versions, as well as the crossing of the Rubicon Primaris, which is, I imagine, a transformative experience in any Space Marine's career. These characters are just the same that they were going in to this potentially life-ending alteration, which in my opinion kind of steals a lot of the circumstance of transforming into a Primaris Space Marine. They're just a little bit taller, so they get an extra wound and an attack, but otherwise, I don't know, becoming a Primaris doesn't seem like a big deal at all. Just an excuse to charge a little bit extra for a brand new miniature. Both Azrael and Dante boast identical abilities to their Firstborn versions. They just get the expected update to their stat block that we've seen on every unit moving from a Firstborn body to a Primaris. The aforementioned +1 wound and +1 attack. Each of them got a little bit of an update to their signature weapons. Dante got a shiny new Perdition pistol with extra range and a beam ability. He didn't even get a better axe. The Axe Mortalis is still the piddly little strength 7 2 damage weapon it's always been. It's just now with an extra attack he can use with it, I guess. And Azrael got a little tiny bit of a statistical improvement to the Sword of Secrets as well. So with each of them getting the same statistical benefit as well as a chosen weapon getting a buff in damage, it feels extremely formulaic. Now, I think a lot of this is kind of imprinted in the DNA of Warhammer 40,000 as more of a role-playing game. Warhammer's always basically been engineered from a role-playing game system. I mean, Rogue Trader literally had a game master at the beginning of the game. And that's why you still use things like weapon skill, ballistic skill, and strength tied to a model's stat block and then reference them on a weapon. Now, that is changing in 10th edition, to be fair, which shows at least a little bit of a progression in the game design, which I appreciate. But it does mean that Warhammer holds on pretty tightly to a lot of the tropes of role-playing games. And one of those is being that characters generally don't really ever lose abilities or change. They just gain them as they level up and progress throughout a campaign. And that's basically how the characters in Warhammer work. They very rarely change their abilities, they only gain new ones. So I guess Dante and Azrael have leveled up. They're level 22 now, and as such they get the standard addition to one of their core attributes. Hopefully that will improve their perception rolls in the future so they could see this coming next time. So I guess this is all to say that I'm a little bit disappointed with the Primaris datasheet updates. I think that for the most part, they're perfectly playable. Having additional combat characteristics for combat characters is good, and while a lot of times both Dante and Azrael filled sort of a support role, so spending extra points on them is a little bit unfortunate. I don't think it's too much, and for the most part, I think that you're still going to see these guys on tables a lot. They're going to late game a little bit harder than they did previously, and I guess that's good. But I do think that potentially updating characters to a new and evolved version of their previous incarnation gives the designers a good outlet to flex their creative muscles. Having new takes on a rule or new riffs on a character's core design is really interesting and cool. And I think keeping them as mundane as they are is a huge missed opportunity. Well, I think Warhammer 40k would be a more interesting game if it allowed historical versions of a character to exist alongside their contemporary version, with different but similar abilities. I also do recognize that Games Workshop is incentivized to replace SKUs over time rather than keep old ones around, to prevent the entirely bloated range of models and datasheets that ended up being the death knell of games like War Machine before it. There are strengths and weaknesses to each approach. I just wish that a more interesting path had been considered. And with that, that's all I have to say about these Primaris characters. Let me know down in the comment section if you are interested in them yourself, and if you agree with me, if you think that they should have maybe gotten another pass rather than just being a reprint of their original version. As always, huge thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks as well to everyone who supports the channel either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.